Here's the first question, and this is your question, Louise, so I hope you're ready. It is widely accepted that philanthropists are increasingly sophisticated and strategic in their thinking when deciding who and what to support. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about why this is occurring and what effect it's having on shaping the current landscape of the philanthropic sector. Louise, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, look, thank you. It's fabulous to be here as well. So it's nice to be doing something back in the arts and culture space as well, because I've sort of been out of that for a while since I left Arts Support Australia. Look, I think on that question, what I would say is some are much more strategic and structured and sophisticated about their giving, because not all of them are. That may be a good thing to hear if you're, looking for funding. But there's no question, a lot of the larger foundations now, whether they're corporates or private, are getting more demanding. And that tends to be, particularly if they're giving away larger sums of money. I'll give you an example. Like the two companies that I run, they're listed investment companies. This year we're donating $8 million. Unfortunately, not to the arts. So one company supports youth at risk and the second one supports youth mental health. But, in 10 years' time, it'll be 30 million. So it's going to really ramp up, and we'll probably end up being the second biggest funder after the Paul Ramsay Foundation. Now, we're quite demanding on the non-profits that we fund, and at the moment we're funding 22 in total. For one company, we've done a social impact evaluation framework. We've had a consultant in, and those 8 non-profits in youth mental health have been put through the ringer, had to do a very detailed 5-year proposal, very detailed budget breakdowns, quite a detailed status report that they've got to do. They've agreed KPIs with us for each of the 5 years. You can see it on our website. I don't think many investors of ours probably even read it, but we've done it because our average donation with that company is about, $250,000 a year. So, we're not giving away $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 a year. So we are going to be quite demanding in that outcomes, impact space. But having said that, depends on the demographic of the funder as well. I've come across, investment bankers, ex-investment bankers that have got, private ancillary funds. They spend their whole working day talking about outcomes and impact and KPIs. They say to me, I don't want to do that with my philanthropy. I want to get close to the founder, the CEO, the curator. I want to actually have a relationship. This is not about being a transaction, and I want to have fun with it. I feel passionate about the cause. So every fund is different, I think, in this space, because in that case, it's not going to be about that funder. It's all relationship driven. It's all relationship driven. And I think one of the challenges for non-profits, whether you're in the arts or not, is that the more sophisticated funders, they're funding a number of organisations. So what happens is, human nature is you sort of rank them, and it often comes down to how good they are in the relationship, how good they are with comms, how well they've checked in with the funder to say, well, actually, how much communication do you want from us? A non-profit or arts organisation can make a lot of assumptions about what they think a funder wants, but not many people sit down in that first meeting and work out, well, actually, how much do you want to hear from us? And how much face-to-face do you want to see versus whatever? So a lot of it is quite simple stuff, but often I think the non-profits and arts organisations treat it more as a transaction. They're not treating it like they would a relationship they might happen in a family situation or even in a business situation. It's got to develop over time. They've got to feel like they're in the inner sanctum. They're not just on a database. And you might have a special database for donors versus other supporters. But I think one of the problems, technology is great, but I think one of the problems is that you get so many emails that we're all overloaded. It's so easy to press that delete button. You know, you got to work out with a donor, well, how often do we actually see each other face to face or on the phone, because it could be much more powerful than sending the emails once or twice a week, or whatever it is. And often they're not going to come to everything you do. That's the other thing. You've got to be much more discerning about what really works for that donor, because it may not work for another donor.
It's very sort of specific and bespoke for each relationship, isn't it, really?
Totally bespoke. I really, really believe that. I think that I always remember when I was at the Sydney Symphony and I was head of development, the managing director, who's an amazing woman, Mary Valentine, who went on to run the Melbourne Recital Centre, and she's back in Sydney these days doing a bit of consulting work. She said to me, look, you'll never get that guy to become a major donor. And this was a guy who'd given small amounts of money to the symphony. And I said to her, look, I really think it's worthwhile me having a bit of a go. She said, well, look, whatever. If you want to go off and, waste your time, off you go. And I really thought this guy had a particular interest in a particular instrument. And you only find that out once you get to know people quite well. And as it was, he did. And at the time, we were trying to get more donors and sponsors to support individual chairs, musicians in the ACO still does it today. I don't know who else does it. And I just got to know this guy, knew that he was interested in the flute, and ultimately, he did end up supporting the principal flautist in the orchestra. And it probably ended up being, I can't remember, it might have been $30,000 a year. But, we got there. But it's interesting, you've got to keep on getting to know the guy, build the relationship, and sometimes it might work with one personal representative from an arts organisation. It's another person who's got, there's a click that happens, and that's sort of what happened there. It didn't quite work, obviously, with the managing director, but something happened. And as it turned out, he was quite a big sailor. My husband's a sailor. They sort of knew it. We found out they sort of knew each other. So there was a bit of a connect on something that had nothing to do with the arts, but it just helped to keep the conversation going,
It's that kind of humanistic element as well, where you're just like, you're not just a really fancy looking ATM.
Exactly.
Donor. You're more than that. You're a sailor.
Yeah, that's right.
You're a flute enthusiast.
Yeah.
And I think that can be really important to find those other aspects.
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. You've got to find the other interests, because sometimes that can be a hook that can ultimately... And also, things start small. I think the other thing I would say is this is not private donors, it's corporate sponsorship, but I always remember at the Sydney Symphony, Emirates is now the principal sponsor, and I did that deal when I was there, and we also struck a deal for the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra and the WA Symphony Orchestra. So it's like a triple sort of principal sponsorship. But that started with Emirates donating a raffle prize for Symphony in the Domain. So it started really small, and it was sort of tough to get that out of them, but 2 years later, they'd become the principal sponsor. So, sometimes you've got to remember that the really small guys, not always, but sometimes it can develop into something that's very, very big.
And I guess the other thing about that as well is that not everyone has a strategy when they're entering into a relationship, really, with an organisation. They're just following maybe an impulse or a love that might be seen as a one-off, but there's an opportunity there once that starts to grow into something else. And maybe it is up to the small to medium organisation to help guide them or help them realise that there's something bigger or deeper there that might really sort of value add to the relationship in the long term.